by acknowledging the territory upon which our offices are. So please join me for a moment. CICAN acknowledges that our offices located in Ottawa are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. CICAN recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. Further, CICAN respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. CICAN has and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. CICAN acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believes that education contributes to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. Thank you very much. Can we move to the next slide? So my name is Judy Vargatoth, and I work for Colleges and Institutes Canada, based here in the nation's capital. And I am also responsible for the Impact Climate Project, through which we have invited you to join today's workshop. Prior to launching into the workshop, we have a very short poll that we would like to invite all of our participants to respond to. I will ask my colleague Andrea to share the poll on your screen, and please answer these questions to the best of your ability. And if you really are not sure, please just select unsure. This is part of our commitment to our funder at Environment and Climate Change Canada, that we are asking you to answer these questions. And so it's important that you just, if you're unsure, it's better for us if you just put that, and we are going to be able to report back to our funder about the improvement in or increase in knowledge that we all might have as a result of participating in these workshops and other aspects of our project. I believe we just have 3 questions, so there should only be one more. And while we wait for that, if you could just move to the next slide, please. Excuse me. So I'm really, really pleased today to be welcoming some speakers from 2 of our member institutions who have fairly lengthy experience with climate action plans, and will be able to share with you their journey from many, many years ago to today, and available to answer all of your questions. We will invite you to use the chat box function as much as possible, because we will likely run out of time with all the interesting and important information they're going to share with us. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and all 4 of our speakers, perhaps you can show the next slide, will be happy to keep answering questions either directly in the chat or verbally as part of their presentations or part of the Q&A that we will have. So there will be some time at the end of the workshop for a Q&A, but in the event that we run out of time, we would really appreciate if you could also put your questions into the chat, and that will give them a chance to be prepared to answer your questions. So thank you in advance to the teams from Humber College in Toronto and Nova Scotia Community College all over the beautiful province of Nova Scotia for joining us today. And before we jump into those speakers and guests, next slide please, I just wanted to let you know that we're going to follow this agenda. There will be a poll, concluding poll, before we go to the Q&A, and then we'll share with you some of the exciting coming up workshops that we have for you, and hope that you'll consider joining us for those as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, today we are coming to you from the Impact Climate Project. So as you may or may not know, Colleges and Institutes Canada has committed to the UN, or actually International 2030 Agenda, which includes the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. CICAN is a proud signatory of the SDG Accord, which has been designed for post-secondary institutions and their supporting associations right across the world. And we invite all of our members to consider signing that accord. I know that both Humber and NSCC have done so. And today we are inspired in particular by SDG number 13, climate action. So CICAN 2 years ago reopened our strategic plan and included a commitment to specific SDGs. And so of course, number 4, quality education is evident for all of us, but CICAN also chose a number of other SDGs that were high priorities based on surveying of our members and also understanding where our national commitments are. And so we have chosen to focus on SDGs 5, 8, 10, and 13 in particular. So today, as part of our commitment to SDG 13, we're here to talk to you about the Impact Climate Project. Next slide, please. And there we go. The Impact Climate Project is a 5-year project funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada federally to enable us to work together with all of you, our member institutions, to increase awareness and motivate behavior change around greenhouse gas reductions in particular. So on our journey to net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. As a nation, as many others have, we have committed to achieving net zero by 2050. And again, as you may be aware, our organization, CICAN, did make a commitment on behalf of our sector after speaking with the leadership of your institutions across the country to this net zero goal as well back in November during COP26. So the workshop we're offering today is to help us all grapple with what it means to get to net zero and how a climate action plan is your roadmap or can be your roadmap. Next slide, please. A recent survey that was undertaken by the Canadian Association of University Business Offices, this was done in 2021, found that in Canada, these are Canada-specific numbers, approximately 25% of post-secondary institutions, this includes both colleges and universities, currently have a cap, but a very large number are in the process of developing one. So NSCC and Humber would be 2 of those 25% that have one, and we're hoping to support our members who don't yet or haven't started or are just beginning to understand what it takes and to help you put in place the tools necessary to do so. From our own CICAN members, we know that about 15% have a plan, 50% are in the process, and the remainder don't have one yet. Next slide, please. In terms of a climate action plan, as I said, it's really your roadmap to achieving net zero. So it includes a number of components, including an inventory of your emissions, and then what we'll take to reduce and your commitment to by how much over what time frame. And you'll hear a lot more from the experts about what that looks like. Next slide, please. We know that our campuses in most cases are like a mini city. And so they do produce a large number of emissions in a variety of different areas. These are the primary areas that any one of our member institutions would be producing GHGs in, and therefore the areas where you could be looking to reduce those emissions and to address those within your cap. Next slide, please. When we look at GHG emissions, they've been divided into 3 scopes. And each of those scopes includes a certain number of sources and different ways of measuring those sources and then reducing those sources. Again, we're not going to go into a great deal of detail on that at this point. My colleagues will speak to these, especially if you have questions. And also, we want to look at the piece of the puzzle that's in green, which is for those emissions that you are unable to eliminate, which is, it is impossible for an institution to eliminate all emissions, you can have and should have a plan to compensate for those remaining emissions that you have. And we will be having subsequent workshops that will talk about carbon offsets or carbon sequestration or other things that you can do to balance out the remaining emissions that you have after you've reduced them as much as you are able. So with that, I'm going to end my part of this, and I'm really excited, next slide please, to hand over the microphone to the true experts, the folks who are working on this very concretely on their own campuses. We're going to start with Lindsay and Spencer from Humber College, and then following their presentation immediately, we'll go into a presentation by Mike and Kirk. And they have asked me to really encourage you to put your questions in the chat box at any time, especially if you're worried that you might forget your question. And hopefully between the four of them, they will get to answer all your questions either in the chat or out loud. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Lindsay to start your presentation.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lindsay Walker, Associate Director of Sustainability at Humber College, which is located in Toronto, Ontario. Just for context, in case you don't know about Humber much, there's about 35,000 or so full-time students, 23,000 part-time and continuing ed. We have over 200 full-time programs across 2 campuses, which also has about 3 million square feet of building space. So fairly large. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about our journey in a very quick few minutes. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So our climate action plan is completed. We worked on it for, I'd say, a year and a half or so. And before doing that, we worked on an emissions inventory. But that's the climate action plan, the focus of today. But it's important to note that we are well along this journey of sustainability on campus and energy and building and waste and everything else that this means to a campus. And so that's important. I know that folks that may be joining are maybe not as far along, or we're all at different points in the journey. So we're going to focus on the climate action plan, but a lot goes into it that we can get ours done in a year and a half, and we can do an emissions inventory within maybe a year because of all the work we've been doing over the many decades, essentially. So this is most of our slides are just snapshots of what the plan includes. So wait for March 23rd. That's when it's coming out. But around 2013 is when we did our first STARS report, the Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System through ASHE. And many folks will know about that, but we can send in the chat some details anyone wants to know more about ASHE. But it's a great place to start. So if you're at the very beginning of this journey, I suggest you do STARS first, which will include energy and has a bunch of credits around square footage and LEED certified buildings and where your emissions come from that begin your metrics, begin measuring where you're at. So we got silver back in 2013. We launched a sustainability plan in 2014. Once we had numbers, we could make a plan on what we're doing, on where we wanted to go. A really key piece for us is the Integrated Energy Master Plan that happened in 2016 or launched, and that took a good, almost 2 years with a consultant to help us build and have so many stakeholders involved within finance and faculty and students engaging in that. And so for us, while a climate action plan, ultimately we all probably know what it is, like we want to get to carbon neutral. You might have just the climate action plan that includes all the things and it's very detailed. And other folks, and ours will, when you see it, will look a little like light, because it is aligned and connected with all these other things and other plans we've been doing over the years. So you kind of can't read Humber's climate action plan without connecting and looking at what our Integrated Energy Master Plan is. And they kind of go together. Anyway, I'll speak to that a little bit more. In 2019, we redid STARS and we're at gold. So we're continuing to measure our do actions and make changes and improve our work and improving our metrics and following that each year. And one of our more special projects that we've just finished and completed in the last couple of years was our NX retrofit, which perhaps some of you have already heard of. We've shared it a lot in the last while, so won't speak to it too much now, but pretty leading, and Spencer may spend a couple minutes on that. Can you go to the next slide? So this is the next stage, right? So here we are sitting at 2022. It's sort of what's the future look like? So with the IMP was taking us to 2024 in terms of energy emissions and water use. And the climate action plan sort of adds to that, takes us to 2050 and makes that commitment to net zero carbon. And we've got some key projects. Like, so once that climate action plan was being developed, we're thinking about things like resiliency and adaptation and how are we going to work, are we putting that in together with it? Probably many climate action plans would. We decided we wanted to spend more time on what that looked like. So we will be coming out with that in another year or so, like spending a little more time with stakeholders on that. That's just the way Humber does it. We have different plans that all interconnect, whereas others will do those all together. So I'm gonna, is there one more slide? Yeah, there's one more slide, and Spencer's gonna highlight some of these specific, how we got to what projects we were gonna do to get us to those numbers. So if we could go to the next slide. Like I said with STARS, and my main focus of messaging today is you just need to know where your emissions are coming from. You can't get to net zero if you don't know where they're coming from. And maybe that's an obvious thing, but it's a lot of work. And so before you start worrying about how to write the document and what stakeholders you're going to engage with, you actually need to just say, where are your emissions? And really spend some time there. So we did that. The way we went about it is we got a consultant to support us with building a tool that we can use internally to add data in each year. So now we have this, it's essentially an Excel document, but pretty intensive one, where we can put in all the data that we've been collecting and gives us these numbers each year. So we have that inventory each year. And this is a snapshot of our, from 2019, 2020. And you'll see they're probably fairly typical for a campus, but a lot of our energy emissions are in the scope 3 area and things that were not in our direct control. Yes, commuting includes all staff, students, and faculty. And what I've got in these boxes are actually the things that we're we will continue to do and start new things as well in order to get at those numbers. But the scope 3 are the ones that are less, there's only so many programs. We can do lots of things to encourage carpooling, but we can't control those. What we definitely control is scope 1. So things like our retrofits, our buildings, our heating and whatnot. And we can do a little bit more control over our food, choosing where it comes from, what are we serving, things like that. I'm going to hand it over to Spencer for the next few slides.
Thanks, Lindsay. Next slide, please. Okay, so after we had done the inventory and we had set our goal of net zero carbon by 2050, then comes the hard part. How on earth are we going to do that? Fortunately, we had already had our energy master plan, which had a lot of information about energy efficiency and carbon reduction. So we broke up our campuses into the big pieces. Essentially, the net zero goal means you have to heat without using natural gas. At least that's what it means for us. And we found three ways to do that. One is to retrofit our building envelope to passive house standards. So insulate it really well, and then you don't have to essentially heat the building at all. So that's the first piece. Expensive, but works. We've done it with one building. Second is heat recovery. So we capture a lot of the heat that we already have on campus with the density that we have of number of people. There's a lot of heat generated in the winter by the people, and capture as much of that as possible. And thirdly, to add decarbonized sources of heat. For us in Ontario, electricity makes a lot of sense. In other parts of the country, perhaps it might be biomass, but whatever it is, you're going to be getting away from natural gas, or perhaps you're on oil or something like that. So we broke up each project, each by campus, and this is where we started to bring in the other plans and the other pieces for the institution. So if we looked at the deferred maintenance for a campus. So if we had a campus and the boilers were installed in 2000 and we knew they were going to have to be replaced in 2035, that would be the obvious time to really address the whole campus heating system. We don't want to spend money twice. We're really trying to maximize the way we do that. So we looked at the deferred maintenance piece. We also looked at what we already had planned for energy efficiency. We looked at paybacks, and we built these buckets of projects and grouped them in some sort of chronological order over the next 30 years. And that's where this list is actually longer than this. It's just a screenshot that captures some of it. But so it's looking at the domestic hot water. It's looking at the heating of the building. There's a piece there about the vehicles, and then there's a final piece about the electricity piece. Can we go to the next slide? So that was the scope 1 and scope 2, but scope 3, as you saw from our graph, is even bigger for us, much bigger. But we have much less control about it. So we do have action items for each one of those pieces, but they're not going to reduce it to zero. A lot of them are beyond our control, but they're more part of our sustainability plan than the climate action plan, but they're in the climate action plan. And there's one for each one. I won't go into the detail there, but there's lots of different pieces there. And then the next one, next slide. Just a very quick, we started our energy plan in 2016. It's to a 2014 baseline. What the problem we had is we built after that a bunch of new buildings. It actually drove up our greenhouse gas emissions. So then to get to our reductions, we had to then absorb all that and then get below it. So you can see here our energy savings is down 20%, but our carbon is only down 5%, and it's because of that. So what we learned from that is any new building in the future has to be net zero carbon, because otherwise you're just fighting the battle even more. So that's something that we learned out of this. Next slide. Here's a few lesson learned very quickly. We need to really think about the resiliency and adaptation. That's something that we sort of figured out midway through doing our climate action plan, and it actually delayed us. We had to go back and rethink about that. And we have more to do on that one. Aligning with the other things that's going on, don't just look at the carbon, look at what else is going on the campus, what new buildings are being built, what's going to be happening 10 years from now, to line everything up. Our focus was to do this without buying credits. The only credits we would buy would be for maybe the electricity use. It's a physiological thing. That's just the way we think about this. We're also worried about the price of those credits 20 years from now. As more people do this, we think the price is going to go through the roof. The plan needs to be specific, but it's not, as you saw from those things, it's not an engineering level report. It's supposed to be realistic, and we've tried to be as flexible as possible, because who knows what technology is going to look like 25 years from now. So we started with the emissions inventory. We set the goals, and we did some engagement with our students and the faculty and staff to make sure that everybody was aligned. And the other piece that we have found from our energy plan is there's actually a financial payback for this. We're going to be spending probably total $100 million over the total thing, and it will pay for itself. So you can create quite a nice story if you think big picture and holistic. And that was very fast, but I'm going to stop there.
Thanks so much, Spencer. Yes, this is so dense and interesting. I know I'm jotting down questions and notes along the way and super excited. So next slide, please. So we're going to hand it over to the NSCC team of Mike and Kirk to share their journey. But keep putting your questions and comments in the chat box so we can have a really engaging, dynamic conversation. So Mike, over to you. Or Kirk, whoever's first.
Sorry, of course I was on mute. I'll start again. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm Manager of Infrastructure and Sustainability at NSCC with the Facilities and Engineering Department. So co-presenting with my colleague here, Kirk Herman, an environmental engineer. So I'm just going to give a bit of a talk about our journey to where we got today, give you some context around NSCC, and Kirk is going to talk more specifically about our climate change plan. So just a little bit about NSCC. So as you can see on the map here, this is a map of Nova Scotia. We're 14 campuses sprawled out across Nova Scotia. We've got 20,000 students, about 3 million square feet of building space. So from a climate action perspective, you know, our carbon footprint is significant. And as stewards of all this infrastructure, we and as educators, we do feel it's our duty to not only sort of minimize our impact, but you know, really lead by example and make, you know, again, this is coming very much from a facilities perspective, but make our facilities sort of part of that educational experience for a student coming to NSCC. You can see in the pie chart here, this is the NSCC's greenhouse gas emission sources. So as you can see, a large chunk of that is electricity. That's one thing that unfortunately makes Nova Scotia quite unique, is we are still burning a lot of coal. But anyway, just as a snapshot, that's our the makeup of our GHG emissions. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to sort of chat about our sustainability journey in general. It probably started about 12 years ago when the college, you know, had this realization that, you know, we are so well positioned to advance sustainability for Nova Scotians, for the world. So really made a commitment that, you know, we are going to be doing things differently. And at that time, you know, 12 years ago, the view of sustainability was quite a bit narrower than than it is today. You know, it was very much, you know, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, water, waste. So from the beginning, very facilities driven, and largely, you know, it was a facilities issue because we did, you know, as Spencer noted, you know, the deferred maintenance is something that we have to contend with, particularly at NSCC. Most of our building portfolio originates sort of from the 60s and 70s. So back, you know, 12 years ago, we really started investing in our infrastructure, really, you know, making our buildings more energy efficient, being quite purposeful about this. And at the same time, we started tracking and reporting these key performance indicators, you know, our energy, our greenhouse gas emissions, our water. We started doing waste audits a couple times a year. And we were putting together an annual report. So this report, you know, it went to our senior leaders, to our executive, to our board. And it didn't take long before, you know, we were able to really track some good progress. So like Spencer mentioned, particularly with the energy savings, you know, that some serious cost savings as well. It didn't take long before we were tracking cost savings sort of in the magnitude of 7 figures. So you know, so in terms of senior level support, you know, we kind of went from you know, this is it's the right thing to do and a nice thing to do, to, you know, we've got to do this. So so I guess, you know, one key takeaway for somebody starting along this journey is that senior level support is key. So anyway, in these graphs, you know, this is just from our most recent sustainability report. You know, to date, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. Our goal is to be net zero by 2050. So for us right now, I mean, we've addressed a lot of deferred maintenance issues. We still have a lot more to go, but we have picked off the much of the low-hanging fruit. So we do need to be more strategic about our next steps, and take a much more holistic approach. You know, this is much bigger than facilities. So I'm going to hand it over to Kirk in a minute to talk about where we are with the climate action plan. But before I turn it over, just, you know, as I was chatting, a few sort of key things that so key takeaways would be, you know, that senior level support is absolutely key, and also, you know, to echo what Humber mentioned, is that the adage, you know, you can't manage what you're not measuring. Really, it is important to measure. And I know, you know, the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, it can be quite daunting. Our recommendation would be to keep it quite simple and report what you can. And as Lindsay mentioned, you know, we did do STARS, I think the first time in 2013. And just sort of holistically for sustainability, that was a really good platform that we're still reporting through. But anyway, at that, I'll pass it over to Kirk to talk about our climate action plan.
Thanks, Mike. Next slide, please. So yeah, hi, my name's Kirk. I'm an environmental engineer with NSCC. I have a really fun job. I get to work on a lot of sustainability and climate change initiatives across the college portfolio. And yeah, I think we have a very unique challenge in our organization, in that we have campuses and facilities spread out geographically across the entire province. So instead of focusing on how we transition one heating plant, we have to think about 14. And so there's a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities in that. And just to touch on what Mike mentioned about measuring, a key strength that the college has had since before I started about 5 years ago is that the college recognized very early on that we just needed to track data and get that information. So when I started, we were kind of in a spot where we had a giant spreadsheet where we were measuring, you know, fuel oil consumption, electricity consumption across these sites, and it was aggregated all in one spot, which was administratively a tough task that took a few years to really perfect. But once we had that, we just had such a better understanding of what the pathway was. And those results that Mike showed earlier in the last slide were, you know, those weren't specifically coming from a climate action plan. That was, you know, from inheriting old buildings and just doing the things we needed to bring them up to, you know, a high standard of of performance with, you know, in respect to how the campus is operated. So that shows that just doing the things you're going to do in maintaining built campus infrastructure are going to get you a long way. But where the college is right now, we've reached this kind of inflection point where in order to make the great strides we need to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, we have to have a much more strategic focus and think of climate like primarily as an objective when we're planning projects. So, you know, compared to where Humber is, we're a little bit further behind. I would say we're in the middle of that year and a half journey about establishing the plan and doing that research, but we're also maybe a bit of a different pathway in terms of where we were measuring and managing energy and emissions when we started the process. And I think that's fine. In general, I think when you're coming up with a plan, you just take a snapshot of where you are and you just put that into the plan. So a good way to describe that is we're developing this plan in 2022. So we know that we have to include not just climate change mitigation, so how do we reduce our emissions and our impact on the environment, but also climate change adaptation. So how do we protect our critical infrastructure and our systems against the inevitable effects of climate change towards as our climate changes towards 2050. So we have, you know, because of our inventory system, we understand where we're going in terms of what our big pieces we have to target for emissions mitigation are. But for adaptation, we're much earlier on in that journey. We're just, you know, part of the plan will be, we will create adaptation studies and reports for our campuses by 2025. So that really is just saying, all right, we're going to get started on the mitigation piece right now. We have a little bit more to go in terms of adaptation. And that's fine because we're setting in stone a process that we're going to follow with timelines associated with it. So yeah, our three big themes are mitigation, adaptation, and education. Education in terms of not just how the institution can educate its students on climate change within its programs, but also education in terms of like institutional knowledge. So a big part of this process we've realized is going out to our different campuses and our different units and management teams and just having conversations about, similar to what we're having today. What is a climate plan? What are mitigation strategies? What are adaptation strategies? And really getting everyone on the same page in terms of what these overall objectives are, so that when they go about their day-to-day life and role within the institution, they can better understand how they can play a small part in these greater strategies. And our role as a sustainability department and as an engineering department is to help them solve their problems, their day-to-day problems, with a climate-centered approach and trying to keep everybody steering the same direction, which can sometimes be a bit of a feat when you're dealing with 14 different teams who are all doing things in their own, kind of world and different geographic area, different economic circumstances. So we just kind of need someone to help keep everybody working in the same direction. And on the slide, we just list some of the kind of overall strategies that we're implementing across those three key themes. And that's just a photo of one of our campuses in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia, where we're starting to embed those principles. So we've got renewable energy, we have new infrastructure built to sustainable building standards alongside old infrastructure that we're renovating and retrofitting. So there's kind of all those key pieces that are kind of embodied in that one photo there. Next slide, please. So kind of where we are in terms of the climate plan, like I said, we're still, establishing the plan itself and rolling it out across the institution. But what we're doing right now is engaging with college stakeholders. So we understand what the themes that we're working towards are and how we're going to tackle them, especially in terms of mitigation. What we're doing is rolling that out to different campuses and creating those plans and pieces for each specific site, because they're all going to have a different pathway. And as we do that, we're creating a climate action working group. So a big piece of NSCC's sustainability success and our early strides in terms of sustainability and climate action have been in identifying champions in different units, departments, and different campuses who put their hand up and say, I want to work on this, and I have ideas, and I have a motivation to work on this. Because oftentimes when you're establishing these structures and these processes, you have to grow them organically, and that's been a huge success for us. So identifying your champions is a key piece. As we roll out the plan itself, one of our baby steps is to help different departments and units come up with their own sustainability strategies and climate plans. So talking to each individual manager in their units and helping them figure that piece out. And then us, as a overall kind of like steward of this plan, just making sure everyone's pointing in the same direction. We're identifying projects and creating business cases. So, Humber mentioned that they have an integrated energy management plan that they can align with the climate goals. We have to, at the college, we're not quite there yet. We've just been doing energy projects as a, must need, as needed basis. So we have to create that energy management plan, but we have an opportunity to create that in alignment with the, climate plan. And then, engagement with college stakeholders. I think a really key piece is to just do that education and awareness piece. Talk to people about what problems they have and how they need to solve them, and then just embedding that climate-centered focus into the conversation. Next slide, please. So key lessons learned. As Humber and Mike said, measure, just get started. Even if you have gaps in your inventory and your emissions, that's okay, as long as you recognize that and you start working towards filling those gaps. So I saw a question came up during the chat that kind of relates to this. So we, at the college, we do a really good job of measuring our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So, directly on our sites and emitted on our behalf by purchasing electricity, which is a big problem in Nova Scotia. And we have started to measure some of our scope 3 emissions. But we do find that you have to be careful what you're taking on. we want sound understanding of what is involved in our emissions portfolio. And sometimes for Scope 3 emissions, when you're getting into things outside of your control, sometimes it's difficult to pin a real number to that is, accurate and that you can start attacking, because the scope creep with Scope 3 emissions can be substantial. So we have a few Scope 3 emissions that we track, like commuting. It wasn't reported on our pie chart there, but we have an understanding of how big our commuting emissions are as rural campuses in rural Canada. It's substantial, and we're working towards that. But other things like paper emissions or food emissions, because we have 14 different food service contracts with different size organizations across the province, we find it very difficult to measure the exact impact of that. But we have strategies we're working towards to reduce those emissions. It's just that we don't necessarily have a quantifiable number we can tie to that. But we recognize that, and we are trying to every year build a more robust system to measure and track those emissions. Assign dedicated resource if possible. I think at the college, that's something that we are reckoning with right now, and we struggle with a little bit. Is, we're the sustainability department. We're not specifically the climate change department. So this sometimes when emergencies come up and big initiatives need our attention, sometimes this stuff has to be done off the side of your desk, and that's okay, especially if you're starting off. Doing some work is better than doing none. So I think if you have that executive level buy-in, if they can help you dedicate more resources to, climate action specifically, that's great. But it's not always possible, and we recognize that's a key challenge. Another just piece is about scoping out visible projects to show sustainability and climate change culture. It's great. Like the real work to mitigate emissions is done in fuel switching and big retrofits, but those are oftentimes millions of dollars and require years to plan and scope out and deliver. And sometimes small things that are very visible can help with that kind of campus culture and just show students and staff that you're taking the problem seriously. Things like, printing, saving paper campaigns and double-sided printing, installing a few electric vehicle charging stations to show that you can help support alternative transportation. Those things don't cost as much, but go a long way into demonstrating visually a culture of sustainability and climate change. And then Mike touched on the final one, that executive support is really key. We've been very fortunate at the college to have a lot of support at a high level to just go and do this work. And having those champions at the high level has been really beneficial for us. And I think that's it for our piece. So we've left a little time for wrap up and questions. So that's it for me. I'll turn it back over, I believe.
Thank you so much, Kirk. And I see Mike may not manage to make it back just right on time. Kirk did not say anything he shouldn't have. It was very well done. Thank you. So welcome back. So Amy's asking you to go back one slide. There we are. Okay, sure. Amy, did you want to go ahead and ask a question?
No, sorry. I just wanted to copy this down.
Okay.
Okay,
sure.
Perfect. Great. So that's great. So feel free to do that. We'll take a perfect pause for a moment here while I ask Andrea to perhaps relaunch the poll. So we can ask you to respond to the poll while you're thinking about your questions. I have a number of questions that I would like to ask folks or to ask our presenters, but I'm sure that the rest of you do as well. And I appreciate all the questions going in the chat and the answers that are being shared as well in the chat. So while we ask you to respond to the poll, I found a couple of things that I would like to ask a question about. And for both teams, but one of the questions comes out of something that NSCC has really talked about, the idea of champions. I know you mentioned the importance of executive support, but also you've mentioned identifying champions in the plural. And my question for both is, what kind of champions are the best? Are they staff? Are they faculty? Are they administration, leadership, students? Like where are the best champions? And if you can answer that question. And then what do you do to train or motivate them or even guide them in any particular direction? So maybe I'll ask NSCC first, since you brought it up, and then Humber to reflect on that same question.
Okay, I can start. So Judy, I don't think there's a wrong kind of champion. I think just identifying those champions. So we've got 14 campuses. Every campus has a small sustainability committee, and we find that and it's open to we do have terms of reference, and the facility manager needs to be there. There needs to be a certain representation there, but we do find that's where a lot of the volunteers come out of, and the real keeners. So for us, so we're doing waste audits at every campus twice a year, and usually those are the ones that come out. They want to volunteer to help us do the waste audits and help spread that sort of messaging across the campus. So I think in terms of we've never really tried to target any specific group for champions, but I think the more diverse that crowd is, the better. If you're able to reach students, if you're able to reach facility staff, if you're able to reach the instructors. But anyway, yeah, I just find that when you find those real keeners, engage with them the best you can.
Okay, and do you offer any kind of, I guess, what supports do you offer your champions, or if any, or are there any needed, in terms of a structured approach to this championing?
Kirk, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm just getting a little background on this. Okay. Yeah, I think the best champion is a very vocal one. I like people who put their hands at the middle of the meetings and ask, maybe sometimes questions that, get people talking. But I think the way we support them, the way I try and support them is I say, okay, you want to work on this? What do you want to see done? And then I do my best job to connect them with the resources they need to accomplish their goals. Whether that's, helping them scope out a potential project, or linking them to funding streams, or just connecting them with someone from another site who's already done something similar. I take it on myself to be that subject matter expert, and I just want people to come to me with big ideas, and then we'll find a pathway to work from there. So the college's approach has been very much organic, because we just want people to come forward with ideas, and we connect them with resources.
And just a quick example of that, we do have we've started up an SDG fund, not a lot of money, but a few $1,000 across the college that we've sent out to all staff. That look, if you've got an idea that supports the Sustainable Development Goals, send us in a proposal, and that's another idea where we found of course is the keeners that bubble to the top, and when you get when you can support something at the campus level that was their idea, you're only going to get more buy-in. So we've had some great projects of gardens and bees and bird boxes and all sorts of good ideas, greenhouses.
So I guess those are some of those small visible projects Richard was referring to as well, right?
Yeah.
That kind of are a signal to the entire campus when they go past something that this is important, because as you said, some of those big ticket items take a long time. They're super important, but you kind of need both probably. Yeah. So Lindsay and Spencer, what about this concept of champions or allies?
All the things that Kirk and Michael said. I'm going to add something different around your committees. I also think of the folks on the committee. They're not necessarily the expert. You do have all the people you need there, direct operations and whatnot, but there's representation from all areas of the college. We only have one that covers both campuses and covers all the departments and faculties. So it's a little bit bigger. They don't all have to come to every meeting necessarily, but we only have 4 a year. And their main job is to be the connector to their department. So getting feedback of what we're up to or what the plans are, and from their constituents and bringing them back, but also being the funnel to sharing that information with everyone. And I would say not just within the committee, but the relationships of those that we have with those committee members, and the relationships we built over time with everyone at Humber, or as many people as we can, that even just the relationships make them become champions. We don't even know what they're doing. Like every once in a while, I'll get an email or a note in a meeting, and before we talk about the subject of the meeting, someone will tell me, I mentioned this, and now we're doing this. Or I'll randomly get an email from finance 3 years after a conversation we had, and we did this change, and we're doing electronic signatures. So I don't know, over time, I now think about it a little bit more like a relationship building, and which we continue to do. We're all doing, all of us in our roles. But it's that relationship building that does create the champions, because they feel connected to the program, to the campus. It's part of it, has meaning. So that, and then the only other thing that came to mind, and Spencer might have something, is engaging students. So, and again, I don't know if I necessarily title this champions, but I would say, like, it's been a huge piece of our success in gaining executive support and gaining all the funding that we've been able to, and building the team and all the things we've been able to do. Bits and pieces along the way have been like, let's get a student group to work on this for us, or like, let's go reach out to that faculty member who's doing that course and see if they want to do a capstone project with us. And then we have a very tangible, here's how students contributed to this. And the students, of course, get that experience of being part of a real life thing that they can take along in their journey as an experience. And we get their feedback from the folks that are in our community. And everybody loves that we've engaged the students as part of our community. So I don't know if it's a champions thing, but it's definitely gotten us forward, helped us forward. Would you add anything else, Spencer, around champions?
Just to say that the sustainability champions are on the sustainability side. The carbon problem is technical and is going to get solved by our energy people at facilities, because there's all the money and the complexity of it. But without the support from those champions pushing pressure on the executive saying, yes, you need to fund this, and the students, it won't go anywhere. So you have to build those relationships under sustainability, even though they're not directly impacting the carbon piece. They're hand in hand, but they're separate.
That's a really good point. And I like that you brought in the concept of funding things. You'll see a question in the chat from Amy about, covering the costs. What ways have you done to do that? And just before you jump in, either of your teams, to answer a bit, when I was thinking, as Kirk was talking about the importance of those small visible projects, just to flag for everybody that there will be a call coming out at the end of March, so in about a month from now, for funding for small-ish demonstration projects around the 5 themes that this climate project is working on. So as a reminder for some of you, the 5 themes that we have are green buildings and landscape, indigenous approaches to sustainability, transportation, waste, and food. And obviously you can see from thinking about the scopes and where the emissions are coming from, why we picked some of those areas. So it is an opportunity for our members to apply for funding to do those small visible projects that can help shift culture. So hopefully you'll all respond. We can only fund 10 in the first year, 2 in each of the categories, and then 10 this following year and 10 the following year, so a total of 30. But it's a small way to contribute to those small visible projects in the sort of the funding envelope. But I invite either of you to respond to Amy's question with respect to how do you fundraise or fund the various projects you do.
Okay, I'll start. We have tried with the fundraising piece. It hasn't been successful so far. We just haven't got any traction with that. But there is some potential there, I think, but we haven't got anywhere with it so far. But we have certainly taken a lot of grants, government grants, federal grants, carbon tax money. There has been money in the past, and I'm sure there will be again. for this stuff. Deferred maintenance money funds some of this. Some operating money from the energy savings funds some of this. And then some of it comes from the college reserves. So it's a mix, and we sort of patch it all together to get what we need. But yeah, it's always a challenge.
I would
Yeah,
just, if I could just
Go ahead.
jump in real quick. I think one thing that we did, or Spencer did with the IMP, was like get everybody around the idea, their brains around how much these things are going to cost. Like the IMP being a 30-year commitment of all the things we needed to do, which is so connected to the climate action plan. And so everyone, once we were done the process of building the IMP, people knew how much it was going to cost, over how many years, what was the ROI we all would agree with and could be comfortable with. All of that was part of the discussion of developing that, so that we didn't have to go, now Spencer doesn't have to go back and ask for money from for each project. Like each year you put in the budget and say, well, this is part of IMP, and we remember we talked about, you know what I mean? It's not a separate ask for each individual project. We approached it as, this is where we're going, this is the goal, here's how much it'll cost, we'll space it out and we'll get grants where we can, but we are on board if we're accepting this, and the board accepted the IMP with that as part of it. So it's an easier conversation now as every time we go back for it.
Thanks. I'll just jump quickly to NSCC, and then I know there's follow-up questions there, but maybe you can answer in the chat. And could NSCC address some of that question?
Yeah, for sure. I think Lindsay and Spencer make really good points from the perspective of an institution that doesn't quite have that integrated energy management plan yet, but we do work on energy projects. I think I think Spencer and I would agree that like infrastructure and climate change are a very like inopportune problem, because you're asking people to commit a large number of resources to solve a problem that doesn't have an immediately quantifiable result. So it's really tricky when people are putting out fires and saying, I got to put a roof on this building next year, to say like, well, we need to invest in something that's going to pay us off in an unquantifiable way in like 30 years. So what we try and do at the college is, the pure payback ones are much easier to sell, right? This one's going to pay us, turning LED lights on is going to save us this much money over this many years. That's easy. But we like, what our strategy is to be very flexible and very opportunistic about having projects prepared and scoped out and costed at a high level, so that when a government grant comes out, a federal funding program, a provincial initiative, or a potential partnership, we can latch on and say, yeah, we have something ready to go, we have it costed, and let's do a cost share. So combining funding streams is super important. Most recently, we've had really good success combining funding streams between facilities, applied research, and academics to do that campus as a living lab piece for infrastructure, installing stuff that's going to help our students learn, and also cost share some of that cost of infrastructure. So that's combining funding streams and being very opportunistic and being in the room. You can say, I got a project that can fit that. Is you have to be very flexible.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Anything to add? That's great. It's a great conversation to be having. And I know we're running out of time. We have run out of time. And so I would just like to conclude by thanking everybody. And if you could quickly move to the next workshop slide, please, Andrea. I just wanted to show folks that what's coming up. So we've just, this is the workshop we're just completing right now, and we have future workshops that will go into even more detail about the different aspects of a CAP, starting with how do you count. For those of you who haven't started counting yet or are beginning to count, then we encourage you to join the March workshop, and then following that there will be April, May, and June will all be touching on different ways to count, whether you go with an established platform and company or you design your own thing, or other approaches. We'll also be talking about trees, and trees count too, and how planting trees and saving trees will help you with the other side of your equation. And then lots more really great workshops coming up in the fall as well. So to go to the concluding slide, I think number 31, to say that, you know, we are very active on social media. We invite you to consider following us, please, on any one of these. Yes, please, Andrea, could you put the link for registration for the next workshop in the chat? It is on our website, but we'll try to get it out there for you. We are also putting lots of energy into the various types of media. So if any of you have, you know, gosh, if anybody still does radio, newspaper, or other neat ways of communicating with yourselves on campus, we'd love to know. We'd love to get information out there as part of a big awareness raising campaign that will launch in September and will hopefully help with the funding and the support from different champions. You know, the more information we can get out there onto various campuses, the more likely it is that people will pay attention and become an ally and a champion. So just wanted to thank you all very much for attending today and for all your questions and your interest. Some folks have put their email addresses in the chat, so we know that people are very happy to share. We are going to launch a mentorship program where some of these people hopefully will be willing to mentor in an informal way others as they go along their journey. So keep your eyes out for that as well. And we wish you a very, very good rest of your day. And we do look forward to you joining us for our next workshop and all of the subsequent workshops. Please invite your colleagues. Maybe it's a way to get some more champions if they join you as well. Thank you so much to Lindsay and Spencer from Humber and Michael and Kirk from NSCC for all the work you've done and for sharing so generously with us today.